I'm going to ask you, I guess I can leave it to you.
Okay.
Talk shoes.
Recorded live.
Good evening. This is the July 12th edition of the BSFS radio show, which is a public service of the Black Science Fiction Society.com group. So here we are this evening, and we are just gratified, thrilled to have with us this evening Turtel Onli, who has a huge, deep background in art, fine art, black comics, visual arts, a publisher, entrepreneur, artist, and he's with us this evening to kind of grace us with his experience in the industry, and especially regarding one of our favorites, and one of my favorites, comics, black comics. Mr. Onli.
Hello. Thanks for having me.
So I guess one of the things that's kind of interesting is that we know that you are a Chicago-born guy, William, who he's a Chicago-born guy. So, tell us a little bit about yourself, one of the other Chicago guys we have.
Okay. I was born and raised in Chicago, and I've lived here most of my life, except when I lived in Europe. And, I spent some time on the road in L.A. and New York. Until very recently, I stayed in the Hyde Park community. In fact, I stayed in a high-rise. I could look out of my window and see President Obama's personal home, and also the personal home of Louis Farrakhan.
Oh.
Okay, it's a very interesting neighborhood, Hyde Park. It is home of the University of Chicago, which was kind of like a playground to me when I was a child. And the Honorable Elijah Muhammad was based there when I was a child. In fact, my grandfather used to rent apartments to members of the original Nation of Islam. So I grew up looking at that, and the University of Chicago. It was a fully cosmopolitan, integrated, culturally diverse neighborhood at a time that the rest of the country was struggling with those ideas.
Oh.
I'm a product of the Chicago Public Schools, graduated from Calumet. Hello?
Yes.
Okay, just want to make sure I didn't lose you. Hearing straight.
Oh, no. We're listening.
But anyway, just getting on the background, I graduated from Calumet High School. People like the vocalist Shaka Khan was one of my classmates. And going on, I graduated twice from the School of the Art Institute in Chicago. My undergrad was in art education, master's in art therapy. I did work as an art therapist in diagnostic clinical situations, battered women's shelters, transitional living, the whole thing. But for the duration, when I look in the mirror, I see myself as an artist, as a visual artist, someone who paints and draws and creates images and organizes them to either have aesthetic impact or intellectual impact or to tell stories.
Okay. Yeah, you were just saying that you were basically Chicago guy, born and raised.
Right.
You made inference to the fact that your family, your grandfather, who was leasing to some members of the Nation of Islam. I look at the work, your focus. I always ask people the religious affiliation. Do you have one? Does it inform or impact your work?
When I'm teasing and being goofy, I say everything has impacted my work. I think I'm one of those people that science, math, the metaphysical, social condition, personal condition, my house pets when I was a cat. A kid, I had cats, not when I was a cat. They were the cats. I think that I'm one of those that any and everything can flow through me and find its way somewhere into my artistic practice. I do fine art. By fine art we mean personal vision, canvas painting, drawings, and things like that. I spent a period in my life where I was a major market illustrator, where I used to draw for companies like WGN and Motown Records, or I worked on an album cover for P-Funk and those kind of people. In fact, that was how I got through undergrad and graduate school, was being a freelance illustrator. But I always had a thing for graphic novels and comic books and wanting to ultimately be a publisher. So my work as a major market illustrator was my way of learning the business so that I could apply those principles to my own concepts.
So when did your ability as an artist first manifest itself?
I like that question because it's a real charming part of my life. When I was 3 years old, I was raised by my grandparents. And so when I was about 3 years old, my uncles, who, of course, were older than me, were all sitting at the table drawing. And so, I walked over to the table, and I said to the uncle that was the most approachable, I said, how do you do that? And he said, well, sit here. And he put a pencil in my hand, and he said, draw. And I've been drawing ever since. But I remember that first day when I started drawing, when I grabbed that big, fat pencil and started making marks on the paper, I could remember the explosions in my brain. I was like, oh, my God. And so by the time I was in kindergarten, I'm like, I'm an artist.
Wow.
It was established. I'm an artist. And I do have friends that have known me for virtually all my life. And so for them, it's all real casual. Oh, man, remember back in the day when you used to da-da-da-da-da? And I have friends that tease to say, you know what, you'll make art whether you get paid or not, because it's true. And so because I came about it as a child, you have that childlike wonder. So I didn't see all the categories. I didn't know comic books was different than fine art. I didn't know fashion was different than architecture. I just thought if you came up within your brain and you could draw it and make it happen, it was art. And so as an old guy in the game, I still kind of think that way. But that's when it started. It started when I was a young child. And my grandfather was a Pentecostal pastor, so from around 1935 until when he passed in 73, he used to make these large charts that not only expressed the Pentecostal message in biblical interpretation, but it had other things going on in it. His congregation was largely African Americans who had come up during the Great Migration, and a lot of these people had literacy issues. So he felt compelled by God to visualize these images to help them to understand what was going on and the pathway to salvation. So as a kid, I would watch him do his art, which to me just seemed very natural. And, the uncle that gave me the pencil was an incredible art maker at that time on his own. So I was one of these kids that I just thought in life you walk, talk, and draw.
So in your family, it was it's such an integral part of what it was that you all were that, I don't know, did you think that that's how everybody else lived?
Actually, I did. I used to think when people told me they couldn't make art, they were just, teasing me or something. It took me a long time in life to be like, oh, wow, you mean everybody doesn't do this?
Yeah, you can imagine.
And, yeah, I'm like, what do you mean you don't do it? Why not? But, later on I got the memo and figured it out.
Well, yeah, but I guess later on you figure out that it is a gift, that not many people actually have. I mean, believe me, I have heard artists tell me in my life, I said, well, I need an artist to do something for me. And they say, well, why don't you just do it yourself? It's like, because I don't think anybody wants a comic book with stick figures in it, okay? And not convincing ones at that.
well, in this era, there is some interesting things done with stick people.
Yeah, this is true.
Okay, and when I teach drawing, I tell students, all right, can you draw a stick person? Well, we get down with stick people. But,
like I said, I didn't too convincing. Mine aren't too convincing, okay?
Yeah. But, if you take one of those classes, you'll be amazed what you could do with a few sticks.
Oh, well, you know what? You may find me on your doorstep in Chicago one day asking you how to make my stick figures convincing.
Okay, I'll give you a good 2-hour session. We'll be on.
All right, okay, I'm holding you to.
Yeah, and okay, keep going. I like this. We got a good flow going.
Yeah. Well, I was going to ask you. You talked about your grandfather, talked about your uncle, and you said, basically for you that you have, you've been an artist basically all your life.
I've been an art maker. Yeah, I've been an artist all my life. Yeah.
Oh yeah.
And it's different.
Yeah, when you made that connection, when you realized not that I'm just doing the thing that I do. But when you realized that you were this different character of human being that's called an artist.
Yeah, that was kind of always there for me. The challenge came in doing that as a career and a profession.
So what was it that, well, I'm sure that when you went off to school and again, you laid out in your dossier that, you have a degree in the arts.
Mm-hmm.
But when you went to school, you knew that the day you walked in the door that that's what you were going to be walking out with, right?
Well, actually, my path would have been a little different. See,
so what would it have been?
In high school, like I said, Shaka Khan was somebody that, we were running in opposite ends of the same circles, but we knew what was going on with each other. And I had other friends, in high school, right? They were musically inclined, right? And they were doing recording sessions at a professional level. And I'm like, wait a minute, there's something wrong with this picture. How can you do background vocals for Curtis Mayfield and I'm just sitting in the studio, in studio art? So I was like, there's got to be a way for young artists that, got the goods can do professional work. So I started thinking about forming an artist guild like maybe my senior year in high school. And then the summer after I graduated from high school, I formed the Artist Guild. And the purpose of the guild was for young artists to get professional work and to lay the foundation to be career artists. So I really turned pro right after high school.
Wow, actually it's kind of an enlightened approach, to be able to kind of, to your liberal arts education type thing, to take one thing to be able, one category and apply it to something in a different category. So that's, before you even got into your liberal arts education, you had already made that jump. So
I was one of these kids that always had to work all his life, my grandfather, if you lived with this guy, you had to work, right? You had to pull your own weight. So I had a job, I had a job in high school. So to me, everything was about having a job. And so the idea of being a professional artist was an easy transition. Now, don't get me wrong. My skills were very uneven. There were professional jobs I could bid on and get, and there were other jobs that were way beyond me at age 18. But that didn't stop me from trying. And what I would do, because like in Chicago, we had Playboy Magazine, Chicago Magazine, WGN, and of course we had Johnson Publishing, which gave us Ebony Jr. and the like. So I was constantly in and out of those offices until I figured out how to grow my skill set to where I could get jobs from these people. And then I started freelancing with them. And so by the time I got, because I ended up going to a community college first and got my associate's degree. And then by the time I got to the School of the Art Institute, my career was on the road. So I had a whole different outlook than a lot of people might have had. I had clients, I had customers, I had my artist guild. With the guild, we were doing exhibits. I mean, we exhibited at Howard University, Northern Illinois. We exhibited at Radcliffe. And we used to rent the artwork out. Now, mind you, this is the early 70s. So I would negotiate a deal where we would rent the artwork out. And when we get the money, we put it in a bank. And if you were a member as a student, we were all college students. So, if you were in a bind, you could petition to the guild to get a check. And you'd petition, and we'd act all, ignorant and hostile. But in the end, you'd walk out with a check to go pay for books or pay your rent or whatever you had to do. And so we were self-sufficient, earning our own money. And the guild stayed together from 1970 to 1977. And it was called BAG, real simple name, BAG, stood for Black Arts Guild. And, a lot of the members in it did go on to be professionals, whether it was as illustrators or in the fashion industry or as educators. But the thrust was to absorb from what was coming from the Black cultural revolution, and then also the idea of being young, gifted, and talented, wanting to work in the industry somewhere. And so it's hard to remember that back then ageism was horrific. So when you were under 30, it was hard to get work. So they say, well, young brother, you haven't paid your dues yet. You know, you haven't been around yet. You're still wet behind the ears. So it's real hard to get work. You know, unlike now, if you're under 30, everybody thinks you're hot and want to hire you.
Right.
Yeah, so ageism has gone the other way. But in my case, you know, that was kind of how it was rolling, and it was all art-driven. You know, my whole thesis was about, you know, being an artist and wanting to see it happen on the visual plane. Yep. Did I lose you? Hello?
I'm sorry. I hit the mute button by mistake, but I moved the phone. I'm talking and thinking, why did
It left us for a minute, but here we are.
Yeah, so no, I picked up the phone and I touched the little. I knew this touch screen don't get along too well.
Okay.
I guess where we are now is, and I know you're talking. We were discussing, you know, the issue of ageism and how you all were treated lesser, quote unquote, because you're younger. And I know now that's the big deal. You know, youth is the thing. Young and hip and young.
Yeah, it's really turned around, and so you know it's all good. In my operation, I call my company Onli Studios, of course, named after me. And yes. I use the name studio to let people know it is about making art that takes place in some studio. And we used to be heavily involved in event planning, but now the focus has moved more toward producing graphic novels and comic books. I mean, I always did that as well, but I've downsized the event planning aspect to emphasize more the production and the quality level of the graphic novels and comic books that we're putting out.
Well, currently, how many titles are you all producing?
I've got about 18 books on the market. That's probably divided around 9 different titles. And I recently signed a deal with Lambiek, which is in Amsterdam, and they're the largest distributor of graphic novels in Europe. And so, you know, looking to, you know, meet the terms of that deal and do other things. I refer to the kind of art that I do, meaning me, myself, as being rhythmistic. You know, I refer to the style as being rhythmism and rhythmistic artwork. And I think that what I'm doing at this phase of my career is taking more time to really add more quality, conversation, vocabulary, and take these things to their logical conclusions. The event planning manifested it largely in the form of my advocacy of the Black Age of Comics movement, which deals with comic books and graphic novels from a Black, African, or urban perspective. And that's a movement that 20 years ago I gave the first Black Age of Comics convention, and over the past 20 years I gave 15 conventions. As a movement, it's doing well. We now have conventions in Atlanta, Detroit, and Philly. People are considering doing it in L.A. and some other markets. The idea of the Black Age of Comics is it is a growing of a genre and a movement in the graphic novel industry, where the original comic books that were created in the 30s and 40s are referred to as the Golden Age. And then when comic books recovered in the 50s and 60s, that's called the Silver Age. And believe it or not, they have something called the Bronze Age. So my outlook was there needs to be a Black Age.
Well, yeah. I mean, I think many of us were collectors of comics. I know I am growing up. So what was it? And I know as a visual artist, of course, there's going to be some allure for, you know, comics, but comics are more than just a visual. There's the visual, and then there's the written word. You know, what was it, you know, about comics in particular that was attractive to you? That, you know, you look at as a, I mean, I gather I'm saying that you look at as a complete form of communication.
Well, when I was a child, it didn't take me long to realize that all my homies that read comic books were as smart as I was or smarter, and that the ones that didn't read comic books were struggling in school. Okay? So I felt like comic books were the key to academic success, literacy, reading, and all that, you know? So I felt like it was the bomb, you know. Not only was it art and fun, but it's like, shoot, it got your brain going.
Yeah.
You know, and I don't know any of my homies that I grew up with reading comic books that had low reading scores, didn't do well on the ACT, didn't go to college. You know, I mean, that whole clique of mine, a lot of those people I still know. And, you know, we grew up to get bachelor's degrees, master's degrees, PhDs, certifications, lawyer licenses, just all this kind of stuff, right? And it's not like we didn't have the same social problems as everybody else. But we all had that big stack of comic books that we read and reread and reread and traded, you know. And most of us would get together and we talk about, like, yeah, man, that made the difference. You know, because when you are processing those pictures and those words to derive meaning, your brain is getting a more rigorous cognitive workout than if you're just processing words by themselves or pictures by themselves. And, you know, they've done studies with people, neurologists have, where they, you know, they put the electrodes on your brain, and while you're going through this, and they could just see to what degree your multiple intelligences are firing in the different regions of your brain to be able to deal with this. You know, this is where in the comic book industry, people, you know, when people get goofy and don't like it, they say, well, I don't like comic books. Those nerdy, geeky guys read it. Well, what do they really mean? Not nerdy, geeky, smart, intelligent.
Mm-hmm.
You know, and so rather it's the egg or the hen. Does the comic book make you smart and intelligent? But then you have to be smart and intelligent to read the comic book. But it does take a certain amount of rigor to do it. And because you're having a good time, you don't always realize the rigor. You know?
Right.
And so, you know, for me, it's like the ultimate art form. And I remember 1977, my first year going to France, I went to an exhibition at the Centre Pompidou, and they had like 8-foot-tall panels of comic books and illustrations from around the world. It was this huge exhibit. Okay, I used to go to the exhibit every day. And what it did after that, I was never again apologizing for being an artist. I was never again backing off of something called a comic book and a graphic novel. You know, it is one of the higher forms of visual arts and literacy out here. And the proof is in the pudding. Just go through the material. You know, the material is there. You know, whether you're talking the simplicity of humor or just the complexity of suspense and fantasy and everything else in between. You know, and it's a very viable art form. It's very accessible. You know, for a few dollars, you can pick it up and have a good time.
Yep.
So one of the things that I noticed being a child of the 60s, as we were, you know, I was split between two worlds. You know, I used to run with the hippies and SDS, and people would call me a blippy, which means a black hippie, and then I used to run with the Black Panther Party, and I used to support the Nation of Islam. And the thing is, I looked from both points of view that culture needed to expand and that this thing called the revolution needed to expand. And so for me, I thought, you know, the visual arts was the way to go. And so what I had as my guild that I founded, the Black Arts Guild, in essence, that got morphed into this movement called the Black Age of Comics.
Yeah.
And as the Black Age of Comics, we're viable. Our legacy is current. This is not something that happened way back when. You can find our products in stores. You can find us online. You can find more and more brothers and sisters that will say, well, you know, I guess I do work in the Black Age. You know,
right.
And some of those brothers and sisters are not Black or African American that identify. You know, it's just like blues. You know, you got a lot of people who call themselves a blues musician, and you know, they come from England. You know, they come from Sweden. And when you have a movement, it's like that. It moves people. When you have an art form, it has a formula. If people practice the formula, then they're a practitioner of the art form. And so after 20 years of Black Age in it, it's out here. It's out here.
I guess so now the next level of question is, what is the relationship between the theories and concepts of the Black Age comics that move into your fine arts theories of imagism and rhythmism? I guess you're bringing images in a artistic, how do those things translate, from one to the other?
I've used my credibility as an art maker to substantiate all the trash I talk. It's in the art. Now, not absolutely every work of art I do should go in the Black Age category, not at all. But I have explored and experimented and expounded on different nuances of African culture, African American culture, Black culture, slave culture, folklore and fantasy, urban culture, street culture, gang culture that shows up in the cosmology of what I write in my books and also how I draw it. For instance, one of my books is called Malcolm 10, and Malcolm 10 is a clone that has been created by the DNA of 10 different significant Black Americans. And he's been engineered during the cloning process to fight against black-on-black problems, the kind that are self-destructive on a collective level. And he has a weapon that looks like a gun, but when he shoots you, it does not shoot a bullet. It teleports you to something called the rhythmic zone where your karma is waiting for you. Okay?
Wow.
And then after you have been healed, you get to come out of the rhythmic zone as an improved person. Now, there's a gang in this community called the Negro Nazis. And the Negro Nazis are insane. They don't want money. They don't want drugs. They don't want sex. They just want to kill everybody. And they want to die in the process. Okay? And in one of the books, the Negro Nazis are doing a drive-by on a church with the guy doing the drive-by. His mother's coming out of the church, and he's shooting anyway. Now, man, this is a book and story that I'm telling you that I first put out in 1991, 92. Now, I got another character called Nog, the Protector of the Pyramids, which was actually the first book I published in 81. And NOG stands for Nubian of Greatness. Well, he comes from planet Nuba. So we're talking about a black planet long before Public Enemy gave us fear for Black Planet. But the idea is that, planet Nuba is on the verge of being pillaged, and Nog, as the protector of the pyramids, has to defend the planet. And all that's at stake in the event that he cannot succeed. So, again, it may be weaved out of very concrete Orthodox history, but then it's extrapolated on in fantasy and contemporary mythology so that it has a different impact. And then I do the illustrations using my rhythmistic technique. And, I bring enough art making to the table that the product is legit. It holds up well. I've subcontracted a variety of people through the years to work with me because, again, I'm a publisher. So as a publisher, it's not all about me, my I. I bring in teams of people to work on projects when I can or when they're willing. And so the idea is to continue to do a product line. I went through a period in my life where I was talking about I was a major market illustrator. In the 70s, I worked with Motown, and I worked on the movie Mahogany. And I had the good fortune of talking to, Berry Gordy and Smokey Robinson about comic books. And they were like, man, we don't know anything about that industry, but this sure does sound good. And I really studied the scenario of Motown after that to appreciate that, the idea of creativity, culture, and commerce is important. And so what I've done with Only Studios, like I said, my first thrust was always to make art. I do fine art exhibits. I do wearable art. I have a wearable art line called Only Wear. But I'm in the process now of radically reorganizing everything because I just really want to focus on making better art just because I want to be better, what else I had to do. And then number two, I want to make more impressive graphic novels and comic books, and I want to get to the point where I can hire more people because the bottom line is if you want to help somebody's life, give them a job. When you can give people jobs, everything gets better for them and their whole world. So my thing is the more I could put myself into my products, meaning Only Studios, then the more Only Studios could do for other people. And I would love to see that. I just recently retired from teaching art in the public schools of Chicago for 22 years. I taught elementary through high school, worked at 8 different schools in a wide range of communities, and I see the potential, but also see the carnage. And part of the carnage is because we don't produce enough opportunities, paying opportunities for young people. You know, we mythalize the brother and sister on the corner that's making all the money selling drugs, but most of them are not making a lot of money. It's minimum wage. They just put in long hours. You know, they put in long hours, and moms got a Section 8, and then at school they get free lunch and free breakfast. So it's easy to walk around with a wad of singles and put a 20 on the outside. You know, but a lot of those young people, if they could work for minimum wage at our studios, doing shipping and receiving, doing graphic design, doing editing, adding a real creative input to the stories, they wouldn't be out there on the corner risking their lives. And so if we want to help them, then maybe we need to challenge ourselves to be more entrepreneur-like in what we do, to be able to say, yo, I want to give you a job. Because for me, periodically, I have freelanced with different young people. And it's incredible to see how they light up when they get paid.
Yeah, and because they know it's their money. They earned it.
Yeah. I mean, they're like, man, you're going to pay me to draw this? Really? Man, you're going to pay me you're going to buy my story? Man, I was just something I wrote when I was bored. Right, I want to buy it. Can I buy it? You know, I'll pay you money. You know, and so, you know, it becomes that kind of thing. And so I see my challenge now and my goal and my attraction is to become not just more entrepreneurial, successful in Only Studios, but also to become more effective with the product and to have the fun and joy of being more involved on the hands-on end as an art maker.
Right now, I have to stop for station identification and let our listening audience know that this is the BSFS radio show, which is a public service of the Black Science Fiction Society. You can find us at blacksciencefictionsociety.com. We are here this evening with Turtel Onli, who is, as those of you all who have been listening realize, is a very deep, complex artist, writer, publisher, community activist in Chicago, and the spreading out, and I guess we'll talk about that, coming up, and making a difference, not just, within our community, as people of color, but in our community as artists. So I guess one of the things that, we always ask, and I know it seems like a simple question, but all of us have someone that is, a mentor, someone that we have tried to pattern ourselves after or not. Other people, professionally that you pattern yourself after, or, the converse, the people in the profession that you have dealt with and you thought, I am going to be exactly the opposite of that person because, I see myself going in a different direction.
Boy, that's a good question. I like that question because the answers all over the place. Number one, growing up as an artist, I was looking at Walt Disney and Pablo Picasso and my grandfather and, Dali. Well, I viewed all of them as successful. So I never understood this thing called starving artists because in my brain, artists didn't starve. So I had that as the template. I viewed art as precious. Precious means money. Money means power and prestige. So I always had that. So I had that as one layer. Maybe magical thinking, but that was one layer. Then in the 60s, I encountered Jimi Hendrix. And what I felt in Jimi Hendrix as a kindred, his being Black and Native American, and in my family's bloodline, we are Black and Native American. Hendrix was left-handed. I'm left-handed. Hendrix did a lot of work that was blues-based, but he did a lot of work that was otherworldly to the point that last year he was still voted the number one guitarist in the top 100 guitarists of Rolling Stone magazine. So from my teenage years when I encountered Hendrix, I saw him as a manifestation of innovation, excellence, adventure, and that concept followed creativity and technique followed concept. I felt like he was the whole picture. And so I would use those paradigms that I felt I understood in his work, and I would morph some of that over to my work. And then, I was a jock. I was one of these young brothers with basketball Jones and all that kind of stuff. So the idea of being competitive, decent competition, that, if the guy beats you, he beats you, right? You don't break out in the fight. You say good game, and then you can practice and try to figure out how to be better. And so,
right.
And so I was never a big guy, 5'10". If I stand on my tiptoes, I can front off like I'm 6 feet. I never had a lot of weight, but at one point, I could play competitive. And the idea of that competition, healthy competition, teaches you how to constantly reorganize yourself, to get things done. But I would say the names that I mentioned would have been the names on one side of the table as an art person or a creative person or things like that. Then when it came to entrepreneurship, I looked at Berry Gordy, who I think is one of the most spectacular African-American and black entrepreneurs that the Western world has ever produced, and people need to go back and really look at it and quit having opinions about things. Just study the facts. Here's a guy that went into the projects of Detroit and came out with David Ruffin. And David Ruffin turns out to be, in modern vocalization, one of the most influential male vocalists in the 20th century. Here's a guy that goes and comes out with Diana Ross and the Supremes. Okay, who has harvested and refined talent to that level and sold it to the world and made money for himself and them like that? And so that level of entrepreneurship needs to be studied, as does John H. Johnson. Here's a guy that comes up from the South to Chicago, borrows money from his mother, and ends up building his own skyscraper in downtown Chicago as his office building with a drive-in garage for him. These are just like ridiculous Mac moves that we act like didn't happen. So to me, on the entrepreneurial standpoint, I look at those guys, and also look at Hugh Hefner. I worked with him in Chicago, not with him personally, but I worked for his company.
Right.
So I look at that. Now, I have yet to come anywhere near. I'm nowhere near it, okay? I understand it, haven't put it together, but at this phase of my life, this is the challenge of putting it together. And so when you ask who are the ones I look at, on one side, I look at people who were creative entrepreneurs and how they did it. Now, mind you, the only one of them that would have been in the visual arts would have been Walt Disney, and I certainly don't have some of the things Walt Disney had, because you got to have a network that's willing to work with you. It is not just about your creativity. You got to have the non-creative people, lawyers, bankers, accountants, pitch people, PR people. There's a whole lot of constellations that have to come behind an idea for it to get to that level of entrepreneurship. And so, but, I like the challenge. It's fun. At the end of the day, I feel good doing it. But those are my standard bearers that I look at, and particularly where most of them were functioning in the unknown. What they were doing had not been done before they did it, or it had not been done at that level. And so I know with myself, dealing with my rhythmistic concept in visual arts and my advocacy of the Black age, a lot of what went down had not been done. And I know that a lot of people are still surprised by it because they never quite thought those thoughts. I was in an interview with GQ magazine a couple of years ago, and they interviewed me, but I posed a question. I said, well, how come your graphic novel collection is not as black as your music collection? I said, how did that happen? We make the product. How come you don't buy the product? Well, we look at your music collection. It's hip-hop, it's jazz, it's R&B, it's soul, it's gospel, it's house music, it's reggae. You can't get blacker than all that. Oh, excuse me, and rock and roll, right? So it's all black, right? but we look at your graphic novel collection, and there's no color anywhere. Okay? And people accept that. And so what I don't accept about it, don't get me wrong, I'm not saying racism. That's not what I'm saying. I'm saying there's this whole level of expression that's not being embraced. There's this whole level of communication that's not being heard. And it's as vacant, it's as empty in the graphic novel, comic book arena as it would be if your music collection didn't include hip-hop, jazz, R&B, soul, funk, disco, rock and roll, okay, take that out of your collection. Now what are you listening to? Okay? So it's the same thing over here with the graphic novels. It's like, how many times you're going to be looking at that dude in that cape doing crazy things? And so that creates the opportunity. You got all those underserved. But anyway, I could go on forever about it, but I think you guys get the idea is that this is what I've been advocating as a movement to grow the genre. Now, that's separate from what I need to do with Only Studios. What I need to do with Only Studios is make product, bring the product to market, so I can hire your cousin. You know what I mean?
Right.
So that if your cousin had the goods, you could say, hey, I talked to this guy in an interview a couple months ago. Why don't you send in your resume? And that I could be in a position to say, hey, I'll fly you to Chicago and give you an internship. I want to be able to get to that level and do it in the right way. Do it in a way where I was teasing somebody. I said, I want to spoil people. I said, I want to get to the point that when people work for me, they're like, you know what, I'll work for that guy anytime. I want to be that good for him. I don't want it to be a hardship. I don't want them going home with a sob story.
Right.
I want them going home feeling so good they want to mail me my money back.
Dang, that's a good one. I like that. I like that.
Yeah. I mean, those are my goals, and part of it is because, like I said, I had the opportunity of working for the companies I work for, and that money meant a lot to me because it paid for college, it paid my rent, and the opportunity meant a lot for me because I got to see things that you never saw in the classroom. Mm-hmm. And I think that one has to differentiate, which I even do. There's artwork I make for me. I know that artwork's not professional. I don't even show it to people. But when I'm being professional, that's different. And a lot of times people have to learn to differentiate. And when you want to do it as a career, you got to find out what the companies want and then figure out, can you do what they want? Can you really do it? And then at what level do you do it? If you could do it a little bit, then you get a little bit of money. Now, when you could throw down big time, you get some big time money. And then comes the politics of the corporate culture. So, all these things are factors. And so I will say to people, get the best education you can, develop a very good sense of work habit. If you can't work hard, then you can't be successful unless you're just lucky. But even then, you need to work hard. It's hard work. And people make hard work sound like drudgery. Hard work is a celebration of life. Working hard is our way of saying to the universe, I'm alive. You experience life at the higher levels, the harder you work.
Right.
And so, you have to do that in the engagement of making a better future for yourself and the people around you. And so in the creative arts, it becomes, a double benefit. But I tell people they can always check my work out at onlystudios.com. That's ONLI studios.com. And they'll see a variety of things on there. And we also operate an information site for the Black Age movement, which is called blackageofcomics.com. So if they want to check out the movement, they can always log on to that site. If they want to see what's current with Only Studios, they can go there. And my site is, it's separated out between wearable art, fine art, graphic art. It's got an educational component. I have what's on there. I have a curriculum web on there that deals with art appreciation. And I put it together because it occurred to me a lot of people need a bit more support in being able to discuss the visual creative arts.
Right.
To talk about line, color, rhythm, composition, history, and things like that, where we're surrounded around every day with the visual arts process. For instance, on my website, I have an exercise on there dealing with international currency as visual art.
I saw that.
Okay. Right. Okay. Because, it is art, right?
And that's the thing, we don't really think of it that way. I mean, but if you look at even, the American money, and it looks like a lithograph, it looks like an engraving. It is an engraving. And we don't think of it that this is art, but it is. Some artist had to do that, had to create that.
Right, exactly. And so, all that's on there for anybody to just check out and have that experience. So I'm glad you looked at that. That's touching. That's fantastic. Mm-hmm.
Well, one of the things I wanted to cover with you, and you kind of touched on it a little bit, is when we talk about distribution. And I think with all comic artists, all small independent publishers, distribution is always a big deal. Everybody is trying to get into the diamond, and they can be very selective about what they accept, and basically they have set themselves up as the gatekeepers, holding the keys to the kingdom. So in your position, you're at the head of a studio. How is it that you have been able to attack the distribution, quote unquote, problem?
Well, I work hard.
We know this.
Okay, I work hard. I'll run down something I got going. I buy and sell other independent comic books and graphic novels. I sell them through my network. I have racks at different stores where we service the racks. If you were an independent publisher, I'd talk to you about, what's the price of your books? If we could buy wholesale, and then we buy them and we test them out in our network. And if they sell, we buy more. I've been doing that intermittently for the past 20 years. At one point, I won't name names, but at one point I was handled by mainstream distributors. But I still did this. I still did my own distribution. I'm currently with a couple of networks that move my products, through major library systems. Like I said, I signed a deal with a major distributor in Europe, but I still distribute books. Today and yesterday I went to see, some of my vendors to see how my racks look and then give them the service I give them. What I've tried to do with other independents, and I've offered this sometimes, that I've offered them real tangible support. They haven't taken me up on it, but I've offered them tangible support because distribution is key. But, this is still the United States of America. We are card-carrying citizens of the United States of America. We are co-creators of everything America has ever done, good, bad, ugly, beautiful, spiritual, crazy, and otherwise. So if Diamond, I mentioned the name, if somebody can organize a major distributor, why can't someone else? There is no wall out there saying thou cannot distribute. So we've proven we can distribute certain kind of products. So how do you harvest that vision to distribute these kind of products?
Exactly.
Somebody's going to come on board to say, at some point. But for Only Studios, we have a strong template going. So if people want to really do good business, and I mean good business, I don't like bad business. If people are honest and want to do good business, I am happy to negotiate with them and see what we could do. But the idea is, a lot of people put a lot of stock in e-books and the internet, and I have absolutely no problem with that. I do that. But the number one distributor of comic books in this country last year sold $473 million worth of comic books to comic book stores alone. That's a lot of money.
Yes, it is.
That's a lot of product, and that's to a very narrow market. So you got to have books on the shelf in front of people. You got to have it. Okay, people got to be able to experience the product. And so those that want to do it online exclusively, I got no knock on that. That's a good thing. That's a good thing. But my focus, and we all have a focus, my focus is I want books on the shelf, and when you walk in the store, you go, oh, my God, what's this? I got to have these. And you forget to buy your groceries, Okay? And you go home, and you're like, what happened to my fried chicken?
Here you can read about it right here in
right.
this book.
Okay. Exactly. See, that's what I want, and I've been advocating that forever. You know, I mean, in the early '90s, I was on the E channel talking about this and just running it down. So I think in 20 years, as I've said, the independent movement has grown exponentially.
Yes.
The Black age has grown exponentially. I think it's doing well. I think the prognosis for it in the future is astronomical and the positive. And that's why I'm gearing up for that future with my own work. And not all of my work is Black age. I do sci-fi. I do fantasy. When I was in Europe, I was a major market illustrator from a European perspective, you know. And a lot of the work I did, you know, you would never know who was behind it. But the point is, I am behind all my work 100%. I'm fortunate enough to have been as versatile as I've been, but all of it comes down to the ability to sit in your studio, to sit in the chair, and do the work, you know, and then to absorb from those you can learn from to do more work.
Yeah.
And so I suggest to people all the time, if you want to know what the Black age is about, then attend one of the events, come and ask questions, and please leave the word stereotype at home. It does not fit. You know, that is a word that should be buried way back in the 20th century with the Model T Ford and whatever else they buried in those landfills.
Okay.
But in this era where we have globalization and the Internet, it is impossible to stereotype anyone. We know too much about each other.
Yeah, we would hope.
You know, we know too much about each other. So you come out to an event, have a good time, buy some product, you know, go home and read it. The product you don't want to keep, you could give it away to a friend. You give it to them for Christmas, Kwanzaa, birthdays. You could donate it to a library. It's all good.
Well, you know what? I guess, you know, one of the things I guess my question is, and you've traveled. You know, you have done the world traveler thing.
Yeah.
In light, and I know, I mean, I have not been to Europe in a very, very long time.
Uh-huh.
But certainly when I went, it was before things like The Wire existed. And I wonder how much affects, you know, the globalization of, you know, that type of, you know, stereotype of, you know, African Americans has had, you know, in other parts of the world. I mean, I'm shocked when, you know, for instance, you know, just recently, you know, the Trayvon Martin case, they talk about the young girl who was the friend of his who's on the phone and, oh my gosh, I can't understand, you know, a thing that she's saying and things like that. You know, some of these major market media pundits and others would say. So with these same people, you know, they watch The Wire and they hang on every word. It's because, you know, there is a point of view of seeing white people that they find acceptable and another that they don't. I mean, this young woman, the issue was, well, she spoke like this, she was wearing this, she had this attitude, but no one ever said, of course, that she wasn't speaking the truth. But, you know, I think to some degree, and it's, of course, you know, my impression, that sometimes, you know, the points of view media that, you know, it's been shipped out all over the world to basically generalize how it is, you know, that people, you know, of color, especially African American people, are in the United States. And I just don't see how that has not had an effect. I mean, believe me, I have, you know, children, you know, who are you know, into the anime type of, you know, the drawing, the culture, and they tell me about how, you know, in places like Japan, there's like this whole movement of girls who dress, you know, quote unquote, like, you know, black girls, you know, from the United States, they, you know, darken the skin, wear the afros and things like that, as if it's your culture yourself, the things, you know, who you are, something you can take on and off. And, you know, is that a positive thing? Is it a negative thing? And I know that's probably a question for another show. But, you know, being a person who has, you know, had the ability to travel in and out of the United States and has done business, you know, as a professional outside of the United States, you know, how have you found that to be? Do you find it to be a non-issue, somewhat of an issue?
Well,
do you find
what I would
an ambassador? in some sense?
Well, what I would say is two things. Number one, people function on their position. And if their position is they want to only see you by your least positive, most negative common denominator, because that's their comfort zone and that's easy math for them, they'll do it. But then when you're talking about that young lady and the Martin case, you can't stereotype that when Michelle Obama is in the top 20 most loved, most favored Americans right now based on a Nielsen survey.
Mm-hmm.
Okay?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, her popularity rating based on authenticity and truth of statement and confidence is that high. And if anybody looks at her lately, she's still real dark skinned. She's still real chocolate, real intelligent, and got there the old-fashioned way, did the work. You know, so to overemphasize when somebody negative gets attention in the media, to not pay attention to El Presidente and his wife and his family is like a focus issue. It's not a media issue. It's what people choose to focus on.
That's where we diverge here. I don't see anything negative at all about that girl.
No, but what I'm saying is, but what I'm saying is to move away from debating that and to look at even higher. When you got the most powerful couple on the planet, African American, I think it kind of seals the deal at that point. Okay, now people may have opinions on what they do or don't do with that power, but that's the power. Here's a guy that can push the button and we'll have a nightmare that we'll never recover from. That's power. You know, and he got there through hard work and intellectual ideation. And so I think that, like, when I've traveled, I know what I bring to the table. And a lot of times people are shocked that, you know, I articulate the way I do, and some things, you know, I mean, what's there to defend? You know, what's there to defend? I mean, when I teach public school, you know, I've taught the worst that comes out of our community, and I've taught the best, and I've seen the worst do the best, and I've seen the best do horrible. I've seen it all, and I think that people who take issue with how it comes across might want to go into our communities and be engaged with people who perpetrate, so that therefore there's no reality behind the so-called image.
Right.
Okay, and if there's reality behind the so-called image, then we need to back off a bit. But I know that some of my students are the kind of guys that when they're on the street, you need to cross the street. In fact, you need to go home. Okay, and if I see you on the street, I'll be like, excuse me, can I walk with you? Because I know my students. And those students that are like that, I know what they do. Okay? And if they think they can get away with it, they're going to do it. Or if they think it's fun, they're going to do it. You know, now, is that all my students? No, it's not. But it's those that do it. Meanwhile, I got other students who will stand and will stand with you and make sure nobody ever touches you or anything of yours. And all these students are in the same class. They all come from the same community.
Right.
Some come with one persuasion, some come up with another. And so I think that sometimes we as a people don't want to accept it. We got the full range. We have to embrace that full range and make it work better.
Yeah. Well, you got a message on the chat room. I don't know if you're looking, but Karen Pride is in the chat room, and she said to say hi to you.
Karen Pride?
Yes.
Oh, hey, Karen. Yeah, she's brilliant. I remember. Yeah. She's involved in film. And what I was about to say, I remember we were at the School of the Art Institute together. Hello. All right. That's good. Yeah, that's it. And, you know, but I think that, you know, those kind of issues represent work. I mean, you know, I don't want to get too political in this conversation. I want to stick with more the art and the power of art and the power of art images and the power of what's done in the Black age in the big picture, and more importantly, Only Studios. I mean, basically the images I deal with are strong, assertive, meaning they jump off the page. If people read my stories, they will learn. They are compelling. They are compelling stories. A lot of people talk more about me being the father of the black age because I coined the term and I advocated the movement. Then they talk about my work as an artist and illustrator. And I was an artist and illustrator for 20 years before I launched the Black Age. So I want to go back. I was teasing. I hate to use other properties, but I was teasing some friends of mine when I was closing my studio recently. And they were like, why are you shutting down your studio? And I said, I'm going Yoda. And he said, what do you mean? I said, you know how you see Yoda in the movies and this old guy walking around on this little cane? And you think, man, he couldn't use a lightsaber. And then when he jump out of use, you be like, oh, my God, I said, well, I want to go back and work on my lightsaber skills. In other words, my art making skills.
Yeah.
I got things to draw. I got things to say as an artist. And at this stage of the game, I've got ultimate time to reorganize my life to do that. So I've just been kind of downsizing to get this new focus. When I look at organizations like Black Sci-Fi Society, they're very important. They're very important. I remember a time when they didn't exist. I remember a time when people couldn't even dream that something like that would exist. And so I hope people support it with their money, not their high fives. High fives are not support. Not with fluff speak. Fluff speak is not support. Support is participation, and that means money. A little money goes a long way. A lot of money goes further, but money makes it grow. And
right.
And I tell people that, if you don't like the way somebody's doing something, then good. Spend money with them. They'll get better. If you spend money with them, it'll improve. It's as simple as that. Okay, if somebody's not doing something, then why don't you offer the services? That's a job for you. Go create a job. Instead of saying, oh, you don't have this, you don't have that. Well, come on. That's your vacancy. Get in there. That's how other entities grow and flourish in the component modular way to become industries, like when you were talking about distribution. And again, like I said, I know I put product out. And so what I notice when I go to conventions, and I go to mainstream conventions. I've done San Diego Comic-Con a lot. I do Wizards, C2E2. I've gone to ECBOC. I produce my own convention. I do neighborhood conventions. But what I notice, people want to talk to me more about, well, brother, you the father of the Black Age. And they're not really talking much about how did you draw that? What made you design that character that way? Or we were looking at page 10 on Nog, the Protector of the Pyramids, and we were trying to figure out just where this planet Nuba is up there. You were talking about the Sirius constellation system from the Dogon people. Just what are you talking about? That conversation doesn't come up. So I figure I need to pull back a little bit from advocacy. It'll do two things. It'll allow for other advocates to come up, to take it places that I never could, which every movement needs. And then number two, I can work on my lightsaber skills. So when they look to be like, okay, we really want to know how he drew this. It's like the other day I was on the bus and I ran into, a professional illustrator that works in the industry. And I was showing her one of my books. And she's like, wow, look at that artwork. Like, what software did you use? And she's naming all kind of elaborate software. And I'm thinking to myself, I used watercolor paint that I bought from the corner store. But I wasn't going to tell her, right? I wasn't going to tell her. I'm just sitting there trying not to laugh. And she's just going down the checklist, right? And I'm like, okay.
Okay. All right now.
I got my little pan of watercolors, having a good time, right?
Yeah. So, are you going to? And you are, for lack of better terms, old school in that way. How do you feel about the digital?
Well, the thing is, like it's like what I said with Jimi Hendrix. I love the digital thing. I love the digital thing. Okay, if you go back and listen to the work of Jimi Hendrix, okay, they now make guitars that tune themselves within 5 seconds. The kind of way Hendrix was playing, he would start off with a tuned guitar and it would go out of tune. He would tune it on stage in the middle of playing a song because the guitars couldn't take what he was doing with them.
Right.
He was using feedback. A lot of what he was doing now is done digitally. But what I'm getting at, if he picked up an acoustic guitar and played some blues, it was soulful and it kicked. So I feel like you got to have both. I feel like if you can't throw down with a pencil and an eraser, then you need to back up and work on your pencil and eraser skills. Now, you need Photoshop, you need Illustrator, you need Paint, you need Maya. Yes, you need that. But that's just like cooking in the kitchen, okay? All right? Now, it's real easy to grab it and throw it in microwave, right? Well, to me, that's like digital. That's like digital. That's a microwave. It's something to be said for having a recipe and mastering it out and having flame in the oven, really taking the time to cook a meal. And that's why we have both, you know. And so I look at the digital thing, I look at 3D, I look at CGI, and I think it is fabulous when well done. And even when it's not well done, it can be really interesting. But I don't think that should be taken away from what you could do with your hand in a non-digital way. So I try to keep the balance between the yin and the yang.
Right.
You know, so it's like I do microwave popcorn, and when my girlfriend comes over, she pulls out the pot and pops popcorn, and I'm amazed because when I try to pop popcorn in the pot, I ended up with a black pot that ain't worth nothing. I got to throw it out. Okay, and to me, she's like the wizard. I'm enchanted, right? She's just shaking that pot, and it's just popping up, and I'm like, how do you do that? You know?
It's just like me when I sit down and watch graphic artists. I say it's magic.
Yeah. So to me, you have to have both. But for my own work, there are nuances. You know, there's still things that I want to do, and it requires that I operate from my hand. You know, it requires that I do that. That's my role in it. And like a lot of times, what I'll do, you know, I hire digital artists to do stuff for me. I mean, I do digital myself. But I have two reasons for hiring people. One, so I could get used to paying people, because you can't be an entrepreneur if you don't pay people. And you can't get good at paying people unless you get in the habit of paying people. You know, that's what it's about. You got to pay people for their services and their goods. So I do that. Number two, it helps if somebody else adds to the product. I don't need the product to be absolutely 100% everything coming from me.
Amen.
And a lot of times the people that I hire, it freaks them out because I'm like, just do it. Don't tell me what you're going to do. Just do it. Because I'm delegating it off. I don't want to be in a long debate. I don't want to micromanage. If you're going to do the digital color for my product, I just want you to meet the deadline, meaning give it to me on the day you say you're going to do it. But whatever you're going to do, go for it. If you're editing my story, please edit it. Don't ask me what did I think of that sentence. Just do it and get it back to me. And I got trust in you, and I'm paying you, and that's what it's going to do. And if you mess my story up, I'm going to live with a messed up story, but next time around I'm going to find another editor.
Exactly.
I'm going to find another editor until finally we get the right chemistry. You know,
right.
You know, I used to coach girls basketball, and other teams used to hate me because I'd be screaming at my girls, you can't miss every shot, keep shooting. So I'd have my girls shooting from anywhere in the gym. I'm like, if you can't shoot the ball at the basket, throw it. So we can't win if you don't take shots. You know?
That's right. That's right.
And so it's like that with the art game. You know, you got to go for it. But my point is, it's a lot of work and fun. And you know, I spent a lot of time teaching. I also teach at a community college. But now that I'm not teaching at the public school anymore, that saves me a lot of time and energy. And I'm looking to bring that time around into, you know, my products. Because there are things going on in my products, you know, that I know are meaningful. I know that they're new kind of stories, they're tributaries to different concepts, and I need to put more time on it. If I was a full-time teacher, which I was for 22 years, and we were doing event planning for 15 out of 20 years with the Black Age Convention, and then 7 of those years I was teaching at a community college, when was I really drawing and writing? Okay, so now I'm shifting that paradigm around. so that I'll spend more time drawing and writing.
Because you are an artist.
Exactly.
And on that note, I wanted to ask, segue into having done the whole, it's the whole route, as artist, as publisher, as, a writer, all these things together, as an entrepreneur. When someone is looking to go into a field in visual art, knowing what you know now, what advice would you give them in trying to set a course in their career?
I would tell them to, number one, believe in themselves, and to get a sense of differentiating good from bad, professional from non-professional, and to learn how to be objective in making decisions about their work and other people's work. What do I mean by objective? You don't have to like it to acknowledge that it's good. You don't have to like the person to listen to their sound advice. That's being objective. The other part is you want to go to the best school in your era. Okay? Like right now, the best school is not going to be the best school in 10 years. So in the moment you are right now, where you are, you want to go to the school with the most rigor, the school that's going to give you the most challenge, and hopefully the school that's the most endowed that you can afford to go to. And then when you get there, you got to tell yourself everybody in the room is more talented than you, have more money than you, have more support than you, and you got to be better than them. You got to just say that to yourself every day, not as a beat down, but as a push up. Okay? And you'll be fine. You'll be fine, but it is competitive because every job you get, there were 50 people that heard no when you heard yes.
Yeah.
And so you've got to be thinking that way, and then you have to shape your life. You have to shape your life around your success. You have to shape your life around your practice. You have to shape your life around your education. I remember a few years ago, I was doing the book I was talking about. I was doing these watercolor paintings. And so, the NFL was having a championship game. My guys were like, man, you need to come. You need to blah, blah, blah. This is going to be this quarterback's last game. I'm like, I can't come, man. I'm working on a project. And so my guy, he's known me forever. He says, you're working on a project? Wow, you got a contract? I said, no, this is my own project. He said, so you can't come to look at the game because you're working on your project that you could just leave and get back to. I said, no, I'm working on my project, and I can't leave this room until it's finished. So when I got over there, it was about 5 minutes left to the game. And my guy said, I guess you finished it, right? I'm like, yeah. But you gotta have that. You gotta have that inner restraint around your practice and your work. And I think that all of that ensures your chances of being successful. It will guarantee that your esteem will be strong. Because to me, what builds high self-esteem is high effort. I don't think you get it through incantations and fluff speak. When you do the work, you know you've done the work. When you put in the study time, you know you have. And like I said, when you can look outside of yourself and look around the room and say, I know they're all better than me. I know they are. Why? Because they're here. They wouldn't be here if they weren't better. But I'm going to outdo them. You want them to be better than you when you show up. Last thing you want to do is show up in a room where you're the best person. That ain't no fun. You want to be like, okay, y'all real good. Let me go home to my studio. I'll be back.
I always try.
Yeah, you got to have that drive, and then you got to always look at what is the industry doing.
Now I'm looking at our time because we are down. We have gone through an hour and 15 minutes. Okay. And I wanted to ask you, there are a lot of questions still we haven't even covered that I have, but right now I want to ask you what projects you have on the drawing board, because there are people, I believe, who are in the chat room who probably have questions for you. Okay. So those of you all who have questions, it will be a very good time right now to start to formulate them. You can ask them either in the chat room. I gather that the the administrator is going to open up the lines after we give the last station identification. But I guess before we do that, I would really like to know, and everyone gets to like know what projects you have on the drawing board now and where it is that we can see you face-to-face between now and I guess the end of the year or going to next year. What events do you have planned, where, somebody wants to do meet and greet? Where can we find you?
Okay, I'll make it real brief. Tomorrow and Sunday, I will be at the DuSable Museum in Chicago, which is right near the University of Chicago. It's in walking distance of President Obama's personal home. It's great touristy. It's the oldest independent and most important African-American museum in the United States. We'll be there for their Festival of the Arts. And during the year, we have a rack of Black Age comics that we sell in the gift shop. That's my next plan. After that, I don't have anything. Well, I do, but I'll just say you can always go to my website, which is at onlystudios.com. The project I'm working on has been a long-term project. It is called The War for Planet Nuba. Like I said, the first book I put out was Nog, the Protector of the Pyramids. Then a lot of years later, I put out Nog It's Back, which is the second installment. And then now we're dealing with The War for Planet Nuba, and it will be out in the late fall. It'll be a graphic novel, and it'll be an ambitiously designed book. It'll be one part narrative, one part novelization, one part sequential drawing like graphic novels and comic books. It'll have pin-ups in it and things like that. But we'll be going back and forth from New Africa all the way to Planet Nuba and to resolve this whole invasion of Planet Nuba. So I'm working on that daily. And I've been working on that for a long time. When I say a long time, I've got drawings for this project that go back to 2004, 2005. So, it's been languishing like that. But it's an ambitious project. And it's
your magnum opus?
Say that again?
The magnum opus?
Yeah, I'm getting a little distortion.
Oh, no, it was your magnum opus.
Oh.
This is your magnum opus.
Yeah, magnum opus. I got you. See, it took a while to get those two words together.
I know.
Okay, there you go. That was good. I'm going to post that. Penelope Flynn said it's his magnum opus. Okay. Y'all heard it. I'm using that line.
Yeah.
I'm glad that Natty got out of there. Oh, yeah. No, it is that. It is, it's an important project. It's dear to me. And, every now and then my girlfriend's like, when are you going to finish that book? And I'm like, I'm working on it. She's like, yeah, you always say you're working on it. It's one of those kind of things. But I am working on it.
Yes, yeah, I understand.
And so if you go to, I have a blog called nogtheprotector.blogspot.com. That's spelled N-O-G, Nog. If you go there, you can see excerpts from the first two books and pages, and it gives you input of where this is headed. Again, it's Nubian of Greatness, but Nog the Protector. And you can find it. And you can also get a link to it from my site. When you go to onlystudios.com, there's a module that deals with graphic novels, and it has links to other things you can find.
Well, I guess at this juncture, we just have a station identification that this is the BSFS radio show, a public service of the Black Science Fiction Society.com. Mm-hmm. And we are here this evening with Turtel Onli. We are down, I guess, now to the last 40 minutes of the show, which kind of just slides right into the forum portion of the show. And those who have some questions, it would be nice for you to put them up, or I gather if the administrator's there, yes, we should open up, and we should open it up the floor to questions. I'm sure that people have a lot of questions for you. And I know I've been told that I'm cutting out, and I apologize for my bad tech, but I hope that you all have been able to hear enough of actually him, because it ain't my show, it's Turtel Onli's show tonight. So I hope that you're able to hear him because, he's the guy. So we're opened up. So the floor is open. I am going to, at this point, moderate, which is kind of just to deal with the flow of traffic. So those of you all who have questions that aren't online on the telephone, you can't call in audio, just post your question on the chat room, and I'll ask it out loud, and then Turtel Onli can respond to you out loud. And in the intervening period, while you all are putting up your questions or getting ready to, speak and ask your questions, I'm going to keep going and asking my questions. So, you can break in on me at any time, that you have something to say, and I will yield the floor. So.
Hello, Turtel. This is Jarvis Sheffield, the admin. I had about two questions. One, what events can we catch you at this year? And two, what projects do you have coming off the press that we need to be aware of?
Okay, once again, this weekend, I know that's short notice, I'll be at the DuSable Museum in Chicago participating in their Arts and Crafts Festival. I'll have a tent there with a few guests, and we'll be selling independent Black Age products and other things. I will send a representative from Only Studios to OnyxCon. I have responsibilities here in Chicago, so I won't be there. OnyxCon is in Atlanta in August. I'm not looking at the specific date, but as a company, we will be represented there.
Okay, great.
And the other times, I'm working on finishing the book, which is called The War for Planet Nuba. And so Nog has been defending Planet Nuba since 1981. We got to bring this war to a close. So, okay. So that's a long time for the brother to be out there fighting the technocratic complex and Magnon the T-monster. But, trust me, he's going to prevail. It won't be easy, but he's going to prevail.
Okay. And I just wanted to make a quick comment as well. Thank you for coming on the show. And also I wanted to thank you for giving me some uplift and encouragement when we first started. And I met you in person when we I went to OnyxCon that first year I came. I think it was the third OnyxCon, second or third OnyxCon.
Yeah, it was the third one, right. Right. Man, this is an honor. You guys don't have to thank me. I'm glad you do. But the thanks is in the exchange, man. This makes me stronger. It adds more, like this is like currency. This is why people like me do the things that we do. So I really appreciate it, man. It's an honor, and it's an opportunity all rolled up together.
All right.
I see somebody commented on the burnt popcorn. Burnt popcorn is terrible. They're right, and I'm telling you, I could burn it with the best of them.
I had a few more questions. So, like I said, if anybody wants to, cut in whenever, just do so. But until then, I'm going to go ahead and, like I said, finish out my questioning.
Okay.
One of the things I had is that one of the things that you said earlier, you indicated that you had done event planning. And one of the things I did see on your site when I was, going through was that the Hyde Park Jazz Festival, that that you all were, a big proponent of that. I mean, very involved with it. Is that one of the events that you all have backed away from, or is that something that you're still doing?
I'm no longer part of that process either. The organization that was behind it, I worked with them behind the scenes and also gave them tangible support for a couple of years. It's interesting you bring that up. Way back in the day, along with everything else I used to do, I used to be a voting member of NARIS, which is to, vote on the Grammys and stuff like that. And I did talent management, did album covers, and one thing led to another. So I ended up using some of that expertise to help work with the organizers of the Hyde Park Jazz Fest. And, it's really interesting because about 6 months ago, I was looking at a survey on the Internet about the 5 most stressful jobs to have. And I think number 1 was airplane pilot, and number 2 was police officer, and number 3 was high school teacher. I'm like, I'm a high school teacher. And then number 4 was fireman, and number 5 was event planner. I'm like, wait a minute, I got 2 of the top 5 most stressful jobs. But they talked about how when you do event planning, so many things go wrong, and you have to be responsible for it, and you got to be ahead of it, and what kind of stress that can create. So, but I did a lot of exhibits, a lot of openings, a lot of promotions, and then also the convention that I used to promote in Chicago. And in producing that convention, I used to fly people in from out of town, put them up for lodging, promote the event, underwrite everything. It was fantastic. It was fantastic. But now that energy changes. But, yeah, I used to work with the Jazz Fest, most definitely.
All right. We have a question from the chat room, and that is, what fine public schools in the fair city of Chicago have you had the privilege to teach at?
What size?
Fine, F-I-N-E. So I gather this is somebody who is a proponent of the Chicago public school system. What fine school?
Wait, I can't make out that word. Is it sign or size or kind?
Fine. And I'm sorry, I do have a little bit of a southern accent, so fine, F-I-N-E.
I worked at the last school I worked at is called Kenwood Academy. Before that, I worked at South Shore, which is a high school. Before that, I worked at Libby. Then I worked at a few elementary schools. I worked at near North. So I worked at high schools and elementary schools. And some were, in very impoverished, troubled neighborhoods. And some were, like, in the case of Kenwood, it's technically an affluent neighborhood. It's in the Hyde Park community. But they were all public schools. I didn't work in selective enrollment schools. These were all neighborhood schools.
You have a question from Karen Pride, and
okay.
since you closed your studio in Bridgeport, where will you now work on your art?
I'm working on getting a studio in the Ravenswood, Edgewater area of Chicago, and I'll be conducting most of my exchanges vis-a-vis the Internet, either with the onlystudios.com site for my specific products or for advocating the Black Age through the blackageofcomics.com site. So I, like a lot of people, will be taking advantage of the Internet to facilitate things, but as far as a working space, I'm looking at space, as I said, in the Edgewater and Ravenswood communities. Nice, Karen.
I guess, again, and I said I'm going to kind of go back to a few of the questions that I had, and just that grand question, as an artist, when we are, as a people, as a community, especially in this downturn, why support the art when there's so many other necessities that have gone wanting?
Well, because art is what makes us human. It is what has made us human from the beginning. Bees make an incredible beehive, but the queen bee can't bust out and say, you know what, I don't like the hive. I want you to put a back porch over here. I want a jacuzzi on that side. I want you to paint a mural over there that looks like some sunflowers. Humans create art, and art creates humanity. Art is good for our brains, literally. It is good for culture, literally, and it is good for commerce. It is good for spirituality. Art plays an intrinsic role in every aspect of our lives. And so for people to get into thinking it's frivolous are just unfortunate. They are missing the obvious, and I feel for them. I know a lot of people like that. I mean, that's part of why I put the curriculum web on my site, where it depicts money as artwork, because art is money. And so the more human you are, the more self-love that you are manifesting, typically the more artwork you will want to embrace. The more love you have for yourself, the more comfortable you are at creative interpretations of you and people like you. We communicate through art all the time, you know, and so it is crucial. It's not just entertainment and frivolous. I think that people make the mistake of narrowly defining art as some painting they didn't understand is sold for a lot of money, and then they walk away. But then they walk away, and next thing you know, they're at home looking at animation and not thinking that's art. Or they walk down the street and look at a mansion and say, "Man, I wish I could have that crib," and they forget that's art. Or they go to a store and they want to buy the next gym shoes. Look, I know a guy that used to work for, I'm not going to name the company, but he used to sit there and design shoes all day long that would end up being major accounts for major athletes, but the athletes aren't drawing the shoes. But my point is, art is everywhere. We do not have commerce. We do not have humanity without art, and a lot of neurologists and anthropologists and archaeologists are now working on a thesis with real good evidence that what developed the human big brain was the making of art.
Well, there's a question in the chat room again. In setting the price point for a graphic novel, is it wise to follow the majors or price your work based upon your market?
If you're trying to be the majors, then follow them and do what they're going to do. If you're being you, then you got to follow your own reality. I think that, get what you can from your market, but you got to look at your own reality first. Well, you don't have to. If you want to follow the majors as your template, that is very good, and you see without a net for you, and, people do it. But at the same time, you got to look at your operation, your overhead, your market, what the market can bear, your product, what is really the value of your product and why, and set your price and then stand by it. So I see value in both ways. And I'm saying that I see value. I know sometimes when I get intense, I sound strange, but I see value in both. So it's a good practice.
A thing that I wanted to ask, and I am watching the board, but I had a question about your term as an art therapist. And I just wanted to know how that affected your life. What type of value did you find, either giving or receiving, from your clients, as an art therapist? And is that something? Is it a career that you would advise for young people who are, or older people who have an artistic bent, but who want to work closely with people? I mean, how does that work out? And maybe explain to us what exactly that is that you do or did, and how it is that affects people, and whether and how that's a good path for you to take.
First thing, I think any path is good if it does good things for you and you can do good things with it. Art therapy is a treatment modality that using the visual arts and the creative process for diagnostics or for treatment in relationship to emotional issues and some psychological disorders. When I was a practicing art therapist, I participated in diagnostic teams as well as treatment teams. I worked with nonverbal children. I worked with handicapped children of different types. We used the term handicap. Now it's referred to as disabled. I worked at battered women's shelters. I worked with people that were addicted on a variety of levels. Some people that clearly were suffering from trauma. I found that it was quite the humbling privilege to be engaged in the true healing process of people and families. And I always had the highest respect for them allowing me to form what we refer to as the therapeutic alliance in art therapy, with the goal being to either discover what was going on with them or to help them recover from it or to cope with it. Mm-hmm. I think that, if one wants to go into art therapy, they should investigate the American Art Therapy Association and see what's out there. And spend some time, visit an art therapist, see if they'll let you shadow them on a job, read some books on it. But the idea is that it is a modality diagnose and treat people. It's not about making a great piece of artwork. The artwork is the process to achieve the therapeutic goal. And so that becomes a different challenge. Or the artwork is the vehicle to get the insight for a better diagnosis.
And how much is the art therapist involved in the process of diagnosis?
It depends on the facility you're at. Sometimes the art therapist is working totally solo. Sometimes they're in a team with the psychiatrist and a psychologist, social worker, occupational therapist, speech therapist. So it really depends on what kind of facility you're in. But if you're trained in a good program, you should be able to work independent. You should be able to do it as a solo therapist. But it's richer, of course, if you work as a team.
Right. All right. Well, again, like I said, I'm watching the board, but I also had a few other questions that I had dropped out that I want to ask. One of them is about the line only wear. And I had the question, why is it, how is it that you decided to have a line of clothing? What was it that prompted that?
Well,
Go on.
I always tease and say I have a lot of things to say and a lot of ways to say them. So I wanted to say some of it on clothing. In the 80s, I was doing wearable art. That was when we had a large wearable art boom. And then a lot of the products we were making started being replicated in Southeast Asia, so we couldn't compete financially. And so I reemerged with only wear with the focus of painting on denim jackets. And the kind of icons, the emblematic images that I put on there are different than the kind of images I put in my graphic novels. But it's another way for me to express this thing that I call rhythmistic artwork and to get things out there. Because somebody's wearing the jacket and you're going down the street, people are like, wow, look at that. So it's still part of the ambition to put art in front of the masses.
And do you know somebody that had a back? I mean, when you had the jacket or the denim that you're using, did you come from the ground up? Did you, actually have jackets made, or they pre-purchased and then the artwork is actually, the jacket, since the denim is a vehicle for the artwork itself and not clothing?
Actually, what I do is I got a variety of sources for the denim jackets, and I would just take the time in my studio and paint them all individually. They're all one of a kind.
Wow. That's interesting.
Yeah. And see, years ago, I used to be part of an organization called the Textile Art Center, and I used to teach airbrush on textiles. And back then, I was doing fleece wear, but I was embellishing it largely with the airbrush process.
Wow.
So that's also something that's been an undercurrent in me. And so, that's why I tease and say I have a lot of things to say and a lot of ways to say it. Yep. And so, it's a good question. I like that. Bring it all out.
Okay. I know somebody was indicating there are a lot of other questions above that I didn't get to. I think that we have to back up on the list and try to see what it was that I missed. I'm not trying to miss anything and hog the guest. But again, I had questions.
Okay, my birth sign is Aquarius.
Yeah, there you go.
And in the Chinese astrology, I'm a dragon. In case somebody was going to ask that.
Okay, and I'm sure someone would have if you had not been so gracious in letting us know up front. So, one of the things that I had on my list of asks is that because you travel a lot, you travel a lot. Is there anywhere other than where you are now in Chicago that to you felt like home?
I felt like home when I lived in Paris. I really did. I felt very, very at home. And keep in mind, when I first went to Paris, I couldn't speak French. And
wow.
I ended up staying there for about almost a year, a couple months. But the thing is, and I spent a lot of time there because I would go back and forth. But I felt very at home. And,
really?
Yeah, I felt very at home there.
All right. So now, I mean, you've had, a really varied, and as I say, a career with a lot of depth. Do you find that you have accumulated a fan base? And in accumulating your fan base, do you have any groupies?
Well, fans, I don't know. People are so timid. They don't let you know they're a fan. You don't know what's going on with people. I mean, somebody's out there buying, looking, and reading, but I think in my case, I've just been so busy. I haven't been able to pay attention to all that, between teaching and producing the events. And I probably wouldn't know a groupie if they had a G on their forehead. I'd be like, what's the G for?
Well, I looked at this. Well, the question that I missed was one of them is that is it ever too late to start learning art? I'm 40 plus.
I think you could learn at any time in your life. Find a comfortable program and instructor, and get a sketchbook. Hey, I recommend watercolors, but crayons, colored pencil, and just make a little art every day, and just hold on to everything you do, and don't be negative. Do not say, "Oh, I suck." Do not say, "Oh, it's ugly." Just say to yourself, you're learning and getting better, and you're having a good time, and it will grow.
Mm-hmm. All right. A nuts and bolts question I had was, what are the least fun elements of what you do that are at the same time necessary for you to complete your goals?
The least fun part is shipping and receiving. It's not good for the back, okay, when you got to lift all these boxes and put them in strange places delicately and all that. And putting together events where you got to really be mindful of every minute detail. So that's not enjoyable. It's necessary. It's very, very necessary. And I'm one of these people that I'd rather take it to the post office. I'd rather package it than to have somebody else do it, and then they do it wrong.
Right.
And so that's necessary, because when you're insuring things for thousands of dollars, you want to make sure it gets there. And the other part, when you're putting your resources behind an event, you want to make sure it happens properly.
True. All right, we have some questions. It says, could you tell us some of the black cons you recommend?
Well, we're talking 4, so I recommend all of them. Each one is different. Each one is different. Onyx Con in Atlanta. I mean, Atlanta's so cooled out, even though it's hot. But it's an important place. It's in a fantastic location. It's at the Southwest Art Center. It's housed between 2 buildings. It's a nice ride in the country to get up there, not that far from the airport. And then Ekbach is in Philadelphia, which is in a different location because it's in the city. Detroit is going through its issues, but, we should all participate in Detroit because Detroit deserves to come back strong. And the event in Chicago, I canceled it this year, but the last 2 years we were part of the African Arts Festival that the DuSable Museum promotes every year. And so, it'll get reorganized. I'm getting some feedbacks from people who, they may take it over, and so we'll see what happens. But the one in Chicago, we would involve more of the city of Chicago. So if you came to the event, there would be tours and other kind of activities going on concurrent to the event around the city, so that people would have a better sense of what I used to call it black age tourism.
Mm-hmm.
So I really feel all of the events are worth a person's money, time, and attention. They really are, and I've gone to all of them. So I feel like there should be a competition to see how many of us could go to all 4 of them.
Okay, all right. And the other question is, do you see yourself as someone to be considered as a John Johnson type in recreating a black communication?
Not exactly. I see myself as an artist whose work got to be prolific at a level that he started thinking about movements. Now, the entrepreneur side of me, if I gotta template myself on somebody, then I think I'd be more like looking at Berry Gordy than I would John H. Johnson. You know, I would think more like Berry Gordy, where I think of each one of my characters as one of the acts on Motown. And then what it takes to do the character would be like being the songwriter and producer for one of those acts on Motown. So I see like where Motown was an assortment of acts, Only Studios is an assortment of characters that are manifested in comic books and graphic novels. So I think that's a better template. And just like Motown created jobs for studio musicians and songwriters and producers, Only Studios has produced jobs for people like that, freelance. But I think if it grows to its logical conclusion, it'd be that same way. So I think Motown is probably a better template to look at.
I had a question about, again, the background you have, that you have done so many projects. Which ones have been the most rewarding, I guess, spiritually, emotionally, versus which ones have been most rewarding financially, such that they're different?
There's a project I worked on a few years ago called Cool Globes. And Cool Globes, they made these fiberglass globes for the planet Earth, and then they selected artists to paint them. And I hired 6 of my high school students to work with me on it. My contract was as such, I got the globe on Friday, and they were picking it up on Monday, and we made that deadline. And I had the students to all sign the globe so that if they ever told someone that they did it, that their names would be on it. Well, as it turns out, that globe appeared in color in the New York Times, and the collection has traveled the world. And when I run into those students, we hug and kiss and giggle about the fact that their work has been in the New York Times, and it's just really a cool thing. And now those students are in their 20s, and now that means something to them that, when they were 17, 18, 19, it didn't. So, and then the concept of drawing attention to coming up with solutions for global warming made it really satisfying. And that was really good.
Mm-hmm.
I think from a financial...
on the financial end, what has been the most rewarding?
The financial end would have been way back when I was a courtroom illustrator for WGN. It was really a high-paying freelance job and very intense, and it was very good, and it was very demanding. It was at a time where being a courtroom illustrator was, a very respectable profession, and so I always cherish that in my memory as my all-time favorite. The pay was good, the intensity was good, and you had to deliver. You had to sit there and draw the trial in the courtroom. You couldn't fake it.
Wow, that is good. That is really interesting.
And you had to do it based on the judge's timeline. So you never knew if you had an hour in court or 6 hours. You didn't know.
Is there a market for courtroom illustrations?
It varies from market to market. It depends on the media in that market, because somebody's got to pay for it.
Yeah, but after you've done it, have you ever thought about, are you allowed to resell?
Well, I really don't know. I didn't engage on that level.
Well, the thing was, because there's so many trials that are big trials, that I would think that the courtroom art for a big trial would be something that people would collect.
Yeah, that varies. Unfortunately, we have to bring this to a close. I'm at a point where I've got some other duties I have to tend to.
Yes, and we are actually almost at the end. I think there's only 10 minutes left, actually, of the time that we have.
Okay, so if there are any other questions but if not, I've got to make my transition to take care of these other details. Again, check
I have a quick question.
Okay.
My name is Alonzo Von 3D. I'm 3D graphics, but I started in traditional. But I'm also a heavy Funkadelic fan, P-Funk Parliament. And you mentioned that you worked on one of the album covers. And I was just curious about, well, first, what album cover that would be, and as well as, is there any possibility of them doing anything in the future? I don't think, like, a lot of the members have passed away recently, and, I don't know if they're financially sound or if their work would actually resell. But I just think all that stuff is just really creative, and with 3D graphics and Maya, it would be some great stuff. Can I have your thoughts about that?
Well, got different thoughts. First, I worked on Shouldn't Have Bit Fish, which was George Clinton. And
the name again is?
Shouldn't Have Bit Fish. It came out, it was the album after Computer Games, which had Atomic Dog on it. Shouldn't Have Bit Fish had a hit called Nubian Nut, and a couple of other hits came off of it. And it was under the name George Clinton. And then, Pedro Bell was a friend and colleague. I shouldn't say was. He's still with us. His health is bad right now. And Pedro is the one that really was doing all the Funkadelic album covers.
Yeah, I didn't know that. There was two, Lloyd Overton as well?
Well, Overton Lord worked more on Parliament.
Okay, all right.
And Overton did a couple of things with Bootsy, but Funkadelic was Pedro Bell.
Okay.
And so Stozo and Overton Lord tended to work on Parliament and Bootsy.
Okay.
And so I was working more with a guy out of Chicago named Captain Sky. He was more a more wholesome version of P-Funk. He was somebody you could take home to your mother. Okay.
Okay.
And so during that era, I did that, and I worked on album covers for other people. With Maya and all that, I mean, it's great to explore those things. One of the hardest things would be who will finance it. And, it's the egg or hen. Do you do it first in Maya, and then somebody says, we dig it, and they'll underwrite it, or do you do underwriting? And see, my involvement with those companies, I mean, I can't get into all that on this phone, but you had the difference between dealing with the creative talent and then dealing with the record label itself.
Right.
So you're doing a project, but then you got to answer to these other people. So there's always conversation about going into their portfolio. There's always conversation about doing something with the work. But so far, nothing's really come of it.
I see.
And given people's health issues and business issues, we'll see. But maybe somebody like you will have the answer.
Yeah. I just, that they didn't seem very open to it at the time. I really got kind of brushed off with it. Actually got my feelings hurt, but I talked to George Clinton when he was in Buffalo. Actually, I didn't talk to him. I kind of hollered to the bus, and he had somebody go. Somebody went in and talked to him and said, "Oh, they're going to do something with Microsoft," and then the next minute, I hear that they had some real financial tough times. So I just don't see anything happen. But the material, I think he was just a genius with the ideals, and more so with the Parliament end, because it's more character, like mainstream characters. So that would be more, just character animation. So I would love to see something happen with that.
If you do that kind of animation and you don't want to be frustrated, look at my website.
Okay, I will do that. And maybe we can take up the conversation again.
See, there are other geniuses out here, and there's other material. A lot of times people will acknowledge the ones that have already had the start treatment and don't see other areas where they could get in and be more successful.
Okay.
But there's a reason why that whole camp has not done the very things you're talking about.
Exactly. Yeah.
And it's not by accident.
Yeah. It's not. It would be quite a hurdle, I guess. So I'll look that up. Look up your site, and just a fantastic interview and very positive image. Positive, just the way you project the positivity and the self-assurance in doing art, especially since it's often, downplayed in our community. So just wonderful work that you're doing on multiple fronts. And I could see how somebody with your extensive background would have to do that on multiple fronts. But I'm sure it's made a difference in a lot of different ways. So fantastic work, and I really enjoyed the interview.
Okay, well, thank you.
We're into the last 5 minutes of the interview, and I certainly would, if you could, I know you've got to go, but if you could just reiterate, for those who come in at this juncture, where it is that they can find your information online, your website, and, of course, I know that you have an event coming up, I guess tomorrow, and just to reiterate those things for those who are going to be able to make it.
Okay, my name is Turtel Onli. That's spelled Turtel Onli, and I tend to refer to myself as being a rhythmistic artist. And you can see my products online at onlystudios.com. That's spelled ONLI, studios.com. This coming weekend, like tomorrow and Sunday, I'll be in a tent selling my works along with some other people at the DuSable Museum in Chicago. We'll be part of its Arts and Crafts Festival. And year-round, you could buy our products at the gift shop at the Art Institute, listening, that's where I graduated, at the DuSable Museum. But do check out onlystudios.com and look at the different modules, and feel free to get in touch with me.
We thank you so much for showing up tonight. So I know we have a lot of your time, but it has been well worth it for us. I hope that it's been well worth it for you, and that you will come back to visit us later on, after you've, gotten some of your current work out of the way, because I know you got to go because you got work tomorrow, dealing with this.
Got to go press.
So thank you again so much.
Okay, and thank you guys a lot. I look forward to it. Okay, peace out.
All right, have a good night.
Have a good evening. Now we're into. 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 Have a good evening. Now we're into.